quick demonstration for one of our students in class where I showed how to paint a very generalized eyeball, but it was a really good conversation, and I figured it might be worth sharing in a permanent place. So I'm going to go ahead and wipe this off and show you how I constructed this eye, maybe at a little bit larger of a scale also. I'm introducing this video during our self-portrait painting project, so it's very relevant right now in class, but this might be something that's worth practicing even if you're not working on this project. So let me wipe this off real quick. All right, and for the self-portrait painting, we are using a limited palette of the primaries. So we have titanium white, cadmium yellow. I'm using a cadmium yellow medium and a cadmium red medium versus a deep or light for both of those colors. And ultramarine blue. So that's the palette of primaries that I'm using. I'm going to grab two different brushes here. So the first thing that I recommend doing, and I'll probably do at least two different examples of different colored eyes. So I have dark brown eyes. Usually when I'm painting eyeballs, hang on a second, let me just make a few adjustments real quick. Okay. Just trying to show my entire palette here. Okay, so I have my titanium white, my cadmium yellow medium here, my cadmium red medium over here, and my ultramarine blue, and then this is a little pile of my medium. So if I'm making a brown colored eyeball, I probably would start with ultramarine blue and cadmium red medium, just a little bit of both. I don't want to mix right into the ultramarine blue just in case I end up getting really close to what I'm looking for with less blue. So I tend to kind of mix from the top down or the bottom up when I'm bringing two colors together. So already I have a pretty dark reddish, brown kind of color happening here. This is probably good enough to do my demonstration. And this is obviously a very dark color, but what I would do first is with a somewhat small brush, pretty thin haired brush here, I'm going to grab some of my medium and thin out my paint so I can draw with it a little bit more smoothly. And I'm going to create my general area of where my eyeball is going to go. So I'm just going to start with a circle. And you can see the paint is pretty thin. You can kind of see through parts of the paint. So I'm not using very thick paint at the moment. I'm just going to fill this in so that I have this space all filled in here. And if this is going to be my right eyeball that's being reflected in a mirror, then the crease of my eyelids is going to be somewhere over here. And the end of my eyelashes is going to be somewhere over here, right? And I'm just kind of making this up based on all of the different times I have painted eyeballs, specifically my own. So this is kind of just a general arc of our eyelids. It ends up being kind of an almond shape. It's not a very perfect oval. They're not exact on both sides. If you look at eyes over and over and over again, you'll find that there's a lot of variation and subtlety in the angles of how the eyes are sitting. And it depends how open your eyelids are, but I'm going to make this one so that there's a little bit of a gap below the round part of the iris on the eye. And typically there's a little bit more of an overlap with my eyelashes there. Okay, so far I've only used one color, this one dark color that I've mixed up, right? The next thing that I would do is mix up a off-white color, that's not the white right out of the tube. So what I'm going to do is place that down next to my brown. I'm going to grab a little bit of that brown just so it's on the edge of my palette knife, as you can see there. And I'm going to mix that into this pile of white that I have. This is going to give me a very violet-y kind of color, but it's a lot darker than my white was. And this is actually a pretty good color. I'm going to grab a little bit of yellow just to offset and cancel out some of the violets. This is a little bit more neutral. And I'm not mixing very much paint here, which might be a mistake. We'll see. I'm going to keep my same brush that I used for the first part of the eye. Grab a little bit of medium. I'm going to go in here. I have a little bit of this brown paint still in the hairs of my brush, so it's darkening this color just slightly, but that's okay. I'm going to go in and just kind of fill in these remaining shapes around the iris. I'm going to do this kind of loosely. I'm not trying to make this photorealistic, especially since this is kind of just being made up on the fly. So I'm just going to kind of loosely do this, right? And you want things to make sense, so pay attention to the edges. Think about how softening an edge is going to help create a more believable shape and character to your eyes. Now what I'm going to do is grab a little bit more white just with my brush, and on the edge of this pile I'm going to mix in white to brighten the value. I don't want to use just white right out of my tube or off my palette, but I want to create a highlight that's a lot brighter than this color that I've already mixed up. So then what I'm going to do is pick a few areas on the white part of our eyes to pop in a few highlights here. And what this is going to do is just round out the illusion that our eyes are cylinders. Right, and with that same color, I'm going to find a place to put in a reflected highlight on the eyeball. And that typically starts to really pop the illusion that there is an eyeball on the surface here. Before I continue, I do want to go in and just put in a few more structural lines just around the eye to give us a sense of how this would fit into your face. Typically, we have this crease above our eye where the eyelid kind of wraps into part of our skull. So there's generally a line that kind of separates these two different planes. And a lot of times too, we also will have lines that describe the lower part of our eyes and how that fits into our face. Sometimes if you're really tired, you'll end up with bags under your eyes, so you can kind of put in a slightly darker value in those areas. And these can all kind of blend in. And the other thing that we notice too is where our eyebrows come in, and that kind of brow over our eyes is generally up in this area here. And then this is this shape that kind of wraps down into our nose. And what you'll have to do is think about the way that light is describing this shape here, which kind of wraps in this direction, right? Hopefully that makes sense. And you can use these different kind of surface contour lines to describe the way that plane is moving in space, just to even help visualize that. So I just wanted to put this in just so you had an example of how this would actually fit into the rest of your portrait. And so far, this is kind of monochromatic, so also think about color temperature and how that relates to some of these things too. But moving forward, I'm going to just kind of work in these two piles of dark and light and find a few middle mixtures along the value scale. And by mixing them between these two ends, I can really judge how dark or light the color is that I have on my brush at any time. So what I want to do now is go in and start to lighten up some of the different values in the eye. And if you look at your eye in a mirror, depending on the lighting of the room or if you're outside, your eyeball will catch light at different amounts. And you'll notice that your eye is reflecting light at varying values. Generally, what I've found through all of the different self-portraits I've made is that because my eyelashes block a lot of the light coming into my eye, there's usually more of a lighter value shift on the lower half of the eye. So you want to just layer up in value, kind of increasing the value as you go. And this is one of the most traditional ways of oil painting, is starting with your darkest color and gradually working up the value scale and layering your lighter colors on top of your darker colors. By doing this, what you'll create is a more gradual and smooth shift in values, and it ends up becoming a little bit more dimensional and more organic looking. And I think both of those qualities are pretty important when we're painting. Now, with a lighter, somewhat lighter middle value, I want to go in and paint the fact that light is hitting this little top of my eyelid here. And again, I'm sort of just guessing based on my experience of painting past self-portraits, but this also tends to happen where there's kind of a highlight along this lid on top of the eyelid here, and then sometimes we end up with a highlight kind of in this area as well. And then our face continues, down this way, etc. Also, what I've noticed is that there's a lot of times a thin line that will catch the very edge of our lower eyelid, and we'll kind of pop that area as well. Something that you'll notice a lot of times is that there's this very reddish, kind of darker value where our eyelids meet, sort of in this area. Could probably use more red, actually. It's sort of like this little triangle shape right here. So if you have a darker eye, this is one way to kind of go in and create your eye. And obviously, if you want it to be more naturalistic, you should just think about your edges and softening some of your edges. You can do that just by kind of gently adding different brush strokes in different directions. That'll give this more of a natural, organic kind of look. I think the cleaner our edges are, the more kind of cartoonish and flat our paintings start to become. So just start to think more about the edges of your shapes and how you can go in and create a softer impression on your paintings. Sometimes there are other highlights on the top of the eye, with brighter little marks. Sometimes you end up with these highlights that go across the two different values as well, things like that. If you wanted to go in and darken your iris, I'm grabbing some ultramarine blue and mixing right back into this first pile, which is a dark kind of violet color. So now I have a much cooler dark, which, as we know, is going to recede in space and is going to appear quite a bit darker than the violet that we initially put in. So if you want to go in and darken this idea of the iris, that's one way to do it. Sometimes too, we get like these really dark shapes and shadows from our eyelashes up along the top of our eyes. A lot of times you'll notice too, the longer you look at your eyes, that these are like little mini abstract paintings, the way that light and color kind of breaks up into different shapes and becomes more and more abstract. But yeah, this is what I would recommend, and with time, you're going to make more and more observations that are going to help the way that you see shapes and the way that you see value and color. But as you're painting, you're developing the way that you look at the world and the way that you think about color. So just give yourself some time to gain that experience, and don't forget to take risks. As a student, this is the best time to take risks in your work and your process, because we tend to learn by making mistakes, right? And by taking risks. So that's how I would recommend painting a darker eye. And you're going to follow a very similar process when painting a lighter colored eye. So maybe we'll take kind of a hazel colored eye. So I'm going to grab some yellow and red. Now I'm probably going to run into a few challenges here since I don't normally paint hazel colored eyes or kind of lighter brownish greenish colored eyes. But like I just said, practicing is the only way you're going to improve. So I'll make this one a little bit smaller so we can save some time. All right, so I found my general color that I want for the eye. I'm going to go into this pile over here for my darks and just bring it over to my hazel colored area. Again, I'm doing this like peripheral color mixing where I'm not just going into the same area of my palette just to save my colors. I want to keep an eye on the way that I'm going to reverse this too. I'm going to go so that the corner, this little triangle shape is over here this time. You know, so this way, if I need to go back to this hazel color, I still have some of it on my palette. I'm trying to also remember to be kind of loose with some of my brush strokes. This is going to keep my edges to be a lot less pristine and not as careful. Maybe I'll also change the shape of the eye a little bit this time too, so I can show you how I would handle if the eye is squinting a little bit more. So this line just has to come up slightly. And maybe I'll bring this one down just a little bit too. So right now, my edges are very, very thick, and that's okay, actually. I think this is one of the great ways where painting is a very friendly and forgiving medium because, you know, if a line is too wide, you can just clean it up later on in the process. So I'm just going in with a sort of like middle greenish value and trying to add some shifts in the eyeball here. Okay, that's pretty good. Trying to wipe my brush off. Now with white, kind of like I did before, I'm going to grab some of this purplish bluish color. Typically, the color of our eyes in this area tends to fall in like a warmish gray, kind of violety gray color. That's what I've noticed. Obviously, it depends on the person, so this could change, but that's, again, with time, how you're going to improve those observations, right? You'll start to notice how people are a little bit different and how colors kind of change, even on the same person, depending on the lighting of the room or what else is in the room that's reflecting into the eye. That could change the temperature of this part of the eye as well. A big thing to keep in mind is that this circle of our iris is usually pretty reliable, that it's a circular shape. So if your edge is irregular in any way, if it's too ovally in one end or triangular in the other end, people will notice that, and it's going to look like your painting is off a little bit. And, you know, maybe if you're intentionally playing around with expectations, that's intentional, but you know, if you're shooting for a very realistic looking eye, that's not going to help you. So just try to keep an eye on the way that you're handling the shape of your iris. Now, kind of like over here, I'm going to go in and pop in a highlight in one area. I'll do one there. And then maybe I'll do a smaller one kind of in that area there. All right, so now let's grab kind of a skin tone color. I'm going to grab some red, a little bit of my medium, and yellow to make an orange. Now that's a very bright orange, so I'm going to grab some white. Not bright, but it's a very saturated orange. Titanium white, you'll notice, kind of makes our colors look a little bit more chalky. It tends to kind of mute our colors a little bit more than other pigments do, while tinting it up. And that's not a bad thing necessarily, but you know, you might have to kind of increase and really play around with the amount of your initial colors for saturation. when you're mixing with white. But I just want to go in and create an area where this again is also going to kind of fall into the head and into your face. So let's give ourselves a little bit of a background here. But you'll notice that the other reason I did this was to kind of thin out this darker line here. And, this might be too sharp of an edge here. So I'm going to kind of soften, but also raise that a little bit while the paint is wet. I'm much happier with that now. Okay, I'm going to grab a little bit of red and mix it into just some of these other piles so it's not just straight red. And I'm going to pop in this little triangle over here. And I've also noticed that a lot of times there's subtle shifts of red kind of on the edges of our eyelids. That'll work there. Now with a little bit of green, I'm kind of muting the red color, bringing it into more of a brown. And I just want to create some lines that describe the face a little bit. A lot of times this area here will kind of follow the brow, and this ends up being in shadow very frequently. So I'm going to try to give that illusion in this painting with a cooler red. It has a little bit more blue mixed into here. Something kind of like that. Maybe I'll do a similar thing over on this side here. This is all with the same little brush too. So you can do some of this with bigger brushes if you want to. That's up to you. I'm gonna grab some of our bluish violet over here and mix that in with the green to create the pupil. I don't want to go with the purple. I think that would stand out too much. It needs to be a little bit more muted. So it's mixing with that green, and that's giving us a more neutral dark to put in. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. This is definitely has a higher key in terms of contrast for the values than the last painting did, but that's okay. I also need to grab some paint, dark paint, to be able to put this line up of the eyelids. Sometimes those lines are very close to the top of the eyelashes, and sometimes they even like get cut off by the eyelashes. It all depends on the way that the eyelid is folding. So I'm gonna guess that this one is kind of going like this time. And this value shift here is a very subtle, right? It's not as dark as the eyelashes, and that's okay. That's a good thing, actually. It's giving it more of a sense of body and volume. I'm going through and just kind of softening a bunch of my shapes. Okay, before I forget, I do want to grab some white, and I want to create that highlight in whatever this part of the eye is called. If anyone knows, please leave a comment so that way we can learn some of the anatomy. Now that's pretty bright, so I'm going to mix that white into this gray to kind of tone it down a little bit. And I can just go right back over that area I just painted and blend it into the rest of the eye. Sometimes you'll notice too that there can be little tiny highlights in the pupil. It's up to you how detailed you want to go. But I think the eye needs a little bit more of a bright, saturated color along the bottom here. So I just grabbed some yellow and mixed it into my green pile to kind of lower the intensity a little bit, and it creates some harmony in with the green already. Right, so this is just one technique or one strategy to paint eyes, but I think you'll find that if you simplify it into simple shapes first, then gradually get more and more complex as the painting develops. You'll find some pretty nice results. And something else is, these little highlights can be very appealing and very attractive, and you might want to pop those in all the time, but try to only do it when it's really necessary. And it can definitely be one of those things that we can overdo in our painting sometimes. But with oil paint, you have a pretty big window to go back and soften some of your shapes and, kind of create a more glowing effect versus some of these harsher highlights. So we're at almost 26 minutes now in this demonstration. The last thing I'll do is grab some yellow and white and maybe a little bit of red, or even some of this kind of darker purplish color here, just to give us a little bit of a jump in our skin color here, so I can show you how I would maybe handle some of the highlights on the top part of the eye, or even like some lower lines down here, or if the light is catching the part of the cheekbone or something over here. This is where we have to think about the planes of our face and how one plane kind of hits another one, and to think about that relationship of how light describes form, right? But that looks pretty good. Pretty happy with that. I might also just do this same kind of highlight here, kind of on parts, just with like a broken edge, just on a few sections of the eyelid. So yeah, there's my eye demonstration. Hopefully this is helpful for you. Definitely try this out at some point, even if you want to just do a couple of eye studies on your Arches oil paper. That would be a good place to do that. But yeah, have fun with this. I'm going to go ahead and just wipe this off so it doesn't dry on my palette, because that'd be very distracting while I'm mixing my paint. Hope you enjoyed this. I am always open to any questions, so if you have any questions about this video, please feel free to let me know. Otherwise, happy painting, and I will talk to you soon. Okay, have a great day.